Hello, everybody. A very warm welcome to our session. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of everyone, on behalf of Switzerland, to actually discuss such important topics as we are here for today. We will be double-clicking in a second on decarbonizing the supply chains and what that actually means. Maybe briefly to myself, and then I will hand over to my colleague. My name is Daniel. I'm a senior partner with BCG. I've had the privilege to grow and work over the past 20 years in BCG, and both as a father, as a Swiss citizen, and as a business professional, it was, a decision that was very easy for me to make when I was asked to take on the helm in our firm to head up the sustainability chapter for Switzerland. And this is one thing where we have significantly focused and significantly also bundled our energy as an enterprise. We have currently what we call two moonshots in our firm. One is on AI, the other one on the whole climate and sustainability topic as a whole. So this is a huge priority for us. There is significant investments that go into this, both in decarbonizing and in looking at sustainability for ourselves as a firm, but actually also taking the responsibility to help others grow in that space. And, you might ask yourself, why is this something for BCG? Why is this something for a consultancy at our size? And I would tell you, as this topic shapes up and people think about it, it feels like a plane that is built while flying in the air. And if we have a capability and train something from the get-go in our firm, is actually to constantly rethink, to constantly innovate, and to constantly be at the forefront of thinking and bringing that to scale. And this is super important if we talk about sustainability, because we all might have, the individual answers to one or the other question, but actually bringing this together and making logical sense to move and to scale is not so trivial. And, it's interesting, we had these discussions as well quite a bit in the Sustainable Switzerland Forum and the Sustainable Switzerland Group with the main partners. And also here we had the privilege to help unlock really the joint thinking. The companies, as we are here and as you represent today, is super diverse. And to find that common denominator and make jointly impact is a pretty hard nut to crack, right? And it's a bit on behalf of that that we are here today, showing you some snippets. And I'm also, super happy to have Jens here, who is actually one of the pioneers in this field, and he will go about a brief introduction, and then we'll go a bit into a few content snippets, as we would suggest.
Dani, thank you very much. Pleasure being here. My name is Jens. I'm an expert partner at BCG, focusing on sustainability in broad, but really with a deep emphasis on climate. I also had the privilege of working in a sustainability role at a big industrial company prior to joining BCG, and I really sympathize with many of the statements we heard from Ursula, Nora, and Ruth about how essential it is to integrate really sustainability in the thinking, in the executive decision-making, combining the financial perspective as well as the non-financial perspective for an integrated monitoring, management, reporting. So we called our session Game Changer for Climate Action, Decarbonizing the Supply Chain. Andre Bardo already talked about it a bit. We hope that we can dig one or two levels deeper. I think the three key takeaways for this topic are, firstly, Scope 3 emissions are, in most sectors, the majority of your emissions. So you got to tackle them. Massive transparency is required. Secondly, it's really about collaboration along the value chain. We heard that this morning from Melati Weisen, we heard that from Ursula, from Migros, that this collaboration deep into your suppliers is essential to get things done. And thirdly, the good news is that actually you can decarbonize your supply chain to a very large extent with close to zero incremental cost. So that's the good news. So what does it mean? As a quick recap from what already Andre told us earlier, right? The greenhouse gas accounting has the logic that your own emissions, so-called Scope 1 and 2, are your own operations, burning fossil fuels, procuring electricity. Then there's the so-called customer use phase. But what we're going to focus on today is what some people also call the emissions backpack, the so-called supply chain Scope 3 upstream emissions, like procured products and services, but also often the transport which comes in. Why is that so relevant? Because it's one of the biggest parts. We'd also like to take to take the mobile phones out, as we would love to understand and engage with you. Where are you on this journey? So, giving you a moment for a quick Slido poll with just 2 questions. Whoops, that was, I think, too fast. Now you have still a QR code. So, and thanks for asking the question, who of you is already measuring your company's supply chain emissions? So where are you in the journey? So let's give it a moment until we've got 40, 50 responses. All right, so I think it's a fairly balanced picture, right? Half of you say we're already measuring it, which I think is exciting. I wouldn't have expected that many. That's really good news here. We've got many sustainability pioneers in the room, I presume. And the other half is about to embark on the journey. Let me put it like this. Now, second question is, let me see if I can click that further. Can someone click to the next page? I can't do it with the clicker. Exactly. Second question, who of you does have a significant share, right? Let's say over 50% or even more of total emissions in your supply chain? So let's see the results, please. Is it again me? Do I need to click? We've got 2/3 basically of you say supply chain emissions are a dominant part. Yeah. And if I click to the next page from the presentation, let me see if I can do it. Oops, that was several clicks too many. Okay, here we go. You already saw a similar chart from Andre this kind of earlier this afternoon. Yeah. For the material producers, the supply chain emissions are usually not that dominant, right? In textiles, chemicals, yes. But a lot of the sectors which are important in Switzerland, like pharma, like food, like construction, partly fast-moving consumer goods, they have a share of 85 up to 90%. Ursula from Migros talked about 98% of her Migros emissions are coming from the supply chain. Yeah, so you got to tackle this. How do you tackle this? What we are seeing is that 4 steps lead to success, lead to a program which reduces emissions and can save cost or come at a small nominal cost. First step, it's all about transparency. If you don't know what you're trying to solve for, if you don't know where the problem is, where it's big, where it's small, you're flying blind. So, like with financial KPIs, the non-financial KPIs, you got to generate visibility in your scope 3. Secondly, what's the right ambition level? Look at feasibility, at cost, at technical elements, investment needs, but also always have the science in mind. What does the planet tell us? How fast do we need to reduce to keep the warming of the planet, or the boiling, I think, as someone of the previous presenters this morning called it, into the limits of the Paris Agreement? And then 2 things which are really where the big action comes in, and that is a journey. Firstly, influencing your supply chain. You got to talk to your suppliers. You got to collaborate along the value chain. You sometimes need to go really deep into several layers down until you actually hit your emission hotspots. It's not always just the tier 1 supplier which sends you the product. You have to actually understand where in the value chain is it and find the right way. So with a balanced approach, you're actually going first after the easy and big ones and then systematically roll out programs. And then the last one is this activation of the organization. We heard that it needs to be integrated in the culture. I think there was a discussion we had, Ruth, Nora, and Ursula had. It needs to be integrated. Sustainable needs to be a part of it. You need to include sustainability, climate criteria into procurement organization, that's a hard one. That's also a longer journey. Now, if we look at the first step, how does it actually look like? And this is not Migros, but a different type of a food retailer. Yeah. So if you get fish and meat on the left side, beef is often a very dominant element because of ruminant emissions, yeah, and partly also land use change. Pork is there, other fresh meat products. You've got the entire drinks, soft drinks, milk, because again, milk comes from cows, yeah, breads, and so on. If you get to such a picture, that's your first shot that understands which category is dominant in terms of emissions. And this then you can do further step by step of which of your supplier in which region and. So for many companies, this is a first boost, probably with a project 3-4 months, but I've seen companies like the company I worked for previously, it's a multi-year journey until you get to a transparency and an updated situation that you really understand where the emissions come from, to pinpoint targeted actions instead of having what the Germans would say a Gießkanne approach. So this is food. In food, you also, secondly, when you know where your emissions hotspots are, similarly, you need to understand what can you do to actually reduce those emissions. Yeah? If you have 100% of total food emissions, yeah, there's one start around circularity recycling, which mainly goes into the packaging, yeah, also reducing transport. There's a big part around material and process efficiency, mainly around packaging, but also other elements in terms of fertilizer use that also would count in that part, really in the agricultural field, partly in the water use and irrigation. Yeah. Renewable power, you got to power your farms, you got to power some of the food factories. Noticeable, but not that dramatic. Renewable heat, there's some processes needed if you think about pasteurizing milk, so there's often still fossil fuels involved. Yeah. And then if you do fuel switch, there's an additional element. Yeah. If you switch from fossil to electric in processes. But the biggest chunk, over half of it, is really around nature-based solutions, different farming practice, regenerative agriculture, avoiding deforestation, avoiding tillages, things like this. So a lot of this, you need to understand where are the emissions, what can you do? And then...
And maybe just chiming in here quickly, right? I mean, this sounds now all easy, right? And if you have it on slide with a couple of boxes and a couple of colors, right? How difficult can it be to get to such a view? I think here is also important that, the data and the understanding of one needs to have from what's actually going on needs to be super sophisticated. And this is, an area where we feel, we can be of particular help, because connecting data, applying AI, Gen AI to such a problem and getting you the answers in days versus in weeks and months, I think that is absolutely crucial, right, to move forward. We can paint these nice slides, and they're in general true, but if you start to drill down to your products, to your value chain, to your steps, to your warehouse, to your distributors, etc., it slowly starts to fall apart. And it's actually with this seamless connectivity where we pair a capability that is business, so what do I solve, versus the AI, and bringing it together in days and weeks to actually bring conclusion to such a topic, right? And this is a good example of the value that we hope bringing to the community and to the society also as a consultancy, because we are able to connect the dots very, very quickly and bring these views so they can actually be implemented. And as we move along, there is a few other thoughts I would like to share, because this is absolutely crucial to get right, and that proper understanding to anchor actually where is an emission happening and not is fundamental. Because if you cannot interact with your organization claiming where the emission happens, you will not get too far, right? And that is a super important, basically, pillar of truly understanding where emissions are embedded.
Yeah, and as I said, with that transparency, where the emission hotspots are, which countries, which regions, which part of your supply chain, and the understanding what can you technically, partly also behaviorally do of changing now that emission situation, it's really helpful again, specifically in the business context, to put numbers against this. And numbers not only from a carbon perspective, which is the horizontal axis of this chart, but also from a cost perspective, which is the vertical axis. So each of those small boxes, we call it a so-called abatement cost curve. Each of those small boxes is actually one of the reduction levers or abatement levers. Yeah? There's material efficiency, which is beneficial because it's got a negative cost. There are higher cost levers, right? Renewable heat. But this helps you now to bring together a reduction perspective, a cost perspective, and then this can, with a proper fact base, partly powered by AI, as Danny said, really help make you the right decision. How far do you want to go at what point in time? Yeah. A lot of the things is actually being self-funded. So if you're doing the things, what do you say, on the left side of this curve, you're actually saving money if you can do that. So those savings can actually finance then some of the costlier measures. So what we always like to say, net zero at net cost is almost possible in a lot of cases. So you get very far if you intelligently design the program. But again, it needs a lot of data, it needs a lot of transparency and a proper understanding what's really going on, what's feasible.
And there's probably a second, more subtle factor in this, and this is also how can you scale and sequence such a transformation, right? And it's far easier to work on stuff that actually saves money and saves greenhouse gas than to go after the very right one, going carbon capture and all this good stuff. I think that's one thing to just keep in mind. And the other one is also, as you are going through the simple stuff, you're learning, yeah? You're learning how to change the thinking, how to change the ways of working. And you're creating that engagement because, if you're working on profitable stuff, that's exciting. It's good stuff. It creates momentum and all that. And as this learning curve progresses, right, you can then get on the more tricky things. And this is super important as we think about scaling this, typical supply chains, large organizations, it's a very people-focused, basically, ways of working, that we embed that thinking. And the second angle that comes with this, a lot of these technologies, carbon capture as one, if you go really to the right-hand side, they are evolving at light speed, right? And hence, by the time you are done with your more easy thing that pays you back, the technology will have seen an evolution, and hence, the ability of you embracing the most new technologies there has gone up. So just as an example, basically, to go at the problem very, very systematically, and this is important as we are basically embracing these organizations. We just called in with another client just 3 days ago. They were basically presenting the bill. They made their SBTi roadmap. They went to the CFO and said, hey, we need 2 billion to get us to carbon neutral. Yeah? And then, it was a very tough conversation with the CFO, and eventually, while they were intending to do the right thing, it was the wrong thing to ask. And actually really getting to this kind of slicing and dicing of the cake so then it actually becomes palatable and implementable and workable for the individuals, it's absolutely crucial. Yeah.
One additional facet I'd like to bring in that while we're very much talking about climate, I think food is a primary example where also you get a lot of co-benefits, or sometimes actually carbon is the co-benefit of smallholder farming, increasing livelihoods of farmers, increasing biodiversity, improving the water situation. So really thinking about the entire sustainability E, environment, S, social, G, governance space. That's also something which is like the next layer of integrated thinking that you're not, let me say, solve one problem and create another problem on the other hand. Now, those were the first 2 steps, yeah? Transparency, understanding what the reduction targets are, reduction levers, reduction targets, required investments. It doesn't always need to cost 2 billion, yeah? But it's really about now going to the suppliers, yeah? You need to understand with whom suppliers, with which suppliers do you do what? How important are they for you? How relevant are they from an emissions perspective? A haircut approach does most often not work. Yeah? I think as Ursula laid out, she's doing several collaborative projects with the farmers, with people who run greenhouse gases, with suppliers who run the logistics. Sometimes she also said, we'll co-invest, yeah, to make it happen. Right? A decade ago, I think Apple took 20 million and went to China and said, we help you as the primary suppliers to actually create renewable power plants that you can run the factories for our iPhones with renewable power because we care and we want to make a change. Yeah. So this is this collaboration approach. And this again around what are the right levers? May it be renewable power, may it be renewable regenerative agriculture. And then it's really around business is also about execution. Drawing up the slides, as you said, that's partly an easy task, yeah, but then really follow through, having the right amount of people. Yeah, it's really launching cross-functional teams. Often, the strategy sustainability department scopes up the program, but then you have to include climate and other ESG sustainability dimensions into the procurement process, into the supplier selection process, else it's not going to happen. Now, let me close with the good news. Full decarbonization has only 1 to 4% impact on the price. Yeah, we talked about the food. Yeah, for 20 euro or Swiss franc food basket, €1 difference, 5%. Does it really make a difference in our choice if it's 5% more? Yeah, electronics. Yeah, 1% cost increase. Construction, also a few percent. So this is the good news, that if you design the program in the right way, engage with your suppliers, you can actually make a difference, a meaningful difference for the planet and for your company at very little cost. Danny, any additional closing thoughts?
You covered it all. No, very good. Questions, thoughts, reflections?
There's the first question. I think we do have microphones, so give us a sec, please. Can I see other hands? We first have the gentleman here with the blue shirt, and then the lady 1 row behind, and then the lady here in front. 1, 2, 3, 4. Got it.
My name's Ian Weddle. I'm from USM. The last slide you put on, how can, with a full decarbonisation, you limit the increase to 2% for a motor car that's made of steel, essentially? How does that work?
We've, together with the World Economic Forum 2.5 years ago, really analyzed several supply chains along the different tiers, looked into steel, what efficiencies still can be gained in process efficiencies. They then often pay partly for the renewable power, which is also coming basically at grid parity in many places, and they compensate some of the more costly technologies like carbon capture and storage. Yeah? So we've analyzed several supply chains and looked at, for example, what goes in the car, right? You have copper, you've got plastics, you've got steel, you've got aluminum. In all of the chains, there are still significant efficiency potentials which help fund the more costly fuel switch measures. And at least that's the result of the analysis. And we've just done that for 2 food suppliers, similarly, and 1 big chemical companies. And we're getting to similar results that are going between 1, 2, and 5% for a full decarbonization. Actually, already about a 2030 time point. Yeah, that if you look at what you can do in terms of if you implement the measures from now to 2030, because it has lead time, yeah, then you would get to a point that at that point in time, it's coming with a relatively low cost increase. Happy to share the more detailed report with you in a second. That's number 5.
I think the concept is important, right? Is the net off is 1%. But what ends up happening, you're more or less decreasing 10% and you're reinvesting 11%. This is the good old lean thinking, right? If you go minimum order quantity ordering, if you have a zero waste supply chain, if you can switch all your distribution to sea versus air, right? All of that saves you money, but all of that saves you as well, basically greenhouse gas. So it's this concept that will actually blow it up. So it's not that the increment is 1%, is actually you're moving it first roughly 10 down, and then you're basically reinvesting 11. Yeah, that's the mechanics on how to shape that. But this is a very important concept because on the journey, actually, as we had this other curve before, you're you're first saving 10%, and then you're gradually basically reinvesting the others. Yeah? So that's the mechanics and how to share. But I would recommend you look up the WEF report. It's pretty well written. It's easy digestible, and it's a fun thought piece too.
And that's then also one of the story which helps to convince your CFO.
Yeah, exactly.
The lady in the green dress.
Yeah, thank you very much for the amazing, insightful presentation. So I just had a question, please. I've read in one of BCG's previous reports the discussion about the 2021 CO2 Act in Switzerland. And we also had a discussion today as well with the representatives of corporate discussing maybe there is not that much need for regulation. How important do you think is the legal framework in achieving full decarbonization?
No, it's a good one. Thank you. No, it's great. And it's good to have faith, right, and in federalism and in trusting people do the right thing, right? It's actually fascinating if you look at structurally, right, where emissions happen today in Switzerland. And, the bad news is it's not something that you can blame somebody for. It's all of us. Yeah? So the biggest emission factor for Switzerland are in heating and are in combustion engine transport, like car and everything. That's the big drive. Then we have a bit of agriculture, a bit of industry, but that's not the big thing. And we had the pleasure to work with Sustainable Switzerland through the fact base of this. Yeah? So if you basically do a demographic analysis of who takes decisions on what heat installations get into building, who has which car, and all that stuff, we can wait until everybody realizes what to do. But I would think if we want to make progress, we need some strings attached to this. That's my humble opinion. I mean, it's good to believe in innovation, and I think innovation is a very important, basically, aspect of the culture. It's a very important aspect of our country, how we work, how we think, how we are successful. But here it's like, it's like in Corona, like if you're not like taking some decisions, it's very hard until this basically converges. It's just, but that is nothing new, right? I mean, we all know this natural phenomenon, right? The natural tendency is to create entropy, right? It's not the other way around, right? And that needs a bit of oomph, if you ask me as a neutral observer, yeah. I would also like it to be different, but I think we would need to make some steps. Yeah. But I'm not a politician, right? I'm just looking at this from the business side. Please.
Thank you. Very interesting. I have a question not on the supply chain, but on Scope 3 with your customers. How do you measure BCG's Scope 3? What's like the effect of your consulting projects? Did he maybe do the same if you didn't consult? And then the effect of what the customer does. I imagine that's very difficult.
Yeah, exactly. So it's also, it's a difficult but also an important question at the same time. So, we internally, the only thing we have is travel. Yeah, I mean, it's super simple. And we have travel, like all the emissions are in travel. Yes, I need a pen every now and then and a computer, but that's neglectable to the other thing. And that's, what we are doing is basically we are measuring this individually. And, the cases I'm running, they have an emission cockpit. And if this goes out bananas, I will have a serious chat with them. So that's basically what happens. So what I can tell you is, since we put this on the radar, for me personally, I reduced 70% of intercontinental travel. 70%, right? I used to be on a plane every second week to the US. Now I'm doing that maybe once or twice a year. That's my personal choice. And this is basically how we act. We have a net zero commitment out as well as a firm. And basically we are very rigorous in that. Internal events and all that stuff, basically there's very little traveling in all this. The other one is a very important question, right? And what do we consider as, reasonable and what not, right? So I think here it's a two-pronged thing. One, we are exposed to the current business environment. I mean, Russia, Ukraine is also a similar twist, right? And people were asking, hey, how long does BCG take to pull out of Russia and all that? We are exposed to this, and we are also learning in that. So hence, we basically have our share. And then the other one, and here we are just trying to be super reflective in how we do and what we have in place as corporate governance and what we consider as good work and what we would consider as not good work to do. And that's a dialogue we are having very, very actively as an enterprise. And then, a lot of the work that we are doing with high-emitting clients, in the oil segment is actually helping them move away from this. Yeah? So, and I think there also we have a responsibility to help them accelerate these journeys. Yeah? So I hope that helps answering the question. Yeah.
CO2 equivalent for scope 3 when you consult your clients. So the scope 3,
Yeah.
supply chain, but your customer, the effect your product, which is a
Yeah.
service.
What we have been doing is for the larger net zero type of projects we've done with our customers, we've also now tracked the potentials as well as the actual reductions our clients are committing to and have been doing, and those we're tracking, right? For example,
I'm not sure I fully follow your question though. Like, when we work on a scope 3 project, how we measure impact, or just in general, how we measure impact?
In general, BCG, you advise companies, for example, to grow in whatever country, do more business.
Yeah.
Could be a typical project. And that has an effect, right?
Yeah, I think the microphone went away. Yeah.
Whether that has an increasing or a decreasing effect. So, like...
How to include it in your own, your scope 3 is a service, right? And I think it's very difficult for a company that sells services to measure the impact, the scope 3 carbon gas emissions of the effect of their service. If you have a normal project,
we don't do that.
any type of project...
It wouldn't be part of the normal greenhouse gas
You wouldn't
accounting.
do that.
No, it's a separate, as Dani said, it's a separate impact
that's
calculation.
Super tough nut to crack.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And there is
I know, that's why I mean...
So like that's also why we say, we're obviously working at these problems in reality, and the reality that we face is what you're also coping with, So basically, if I'm advising a client to do X, that client might choose to do X, but there is 1,000 other factors that choose while he is doing X, what impacts that, and what share do you then take of that and all that. You're going there into complexities that, are super hard to follow through.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I'm just saying
Yeah.
other companies that sell services might have the same challenge, and so it's all unsolved, probably.
Good.
Yeah, that's unsolved. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Let's move to the next question. I think the lady in the turquoise shirt, I think there's already a microphone over there.
Yeah, thank you. My name's Christine Crosby, and I work at the Hero Food Group. And I would be grateful for a bit more insights on nature-based solutions. I think one of your previous slides, the contribution more than 50%. So you highlighted the regenerative ag and deforestation. Could you go a bit further into some of the key levers, because those are big topics?
Yeah. Well, I said, those are really the main topics, right? There's still globally, has always been a view on global reduction potentials, right? And still a lot of deforestation and land use change is happening to create more food for more people and wealthier people. Yeah, that's the one big driver, and changing this is a really significant chunk of the 56% here. Yeah. The other part, and it's both food for humans as well as feed for animals, which then again become food for humans. Yeah. The other part is really different parts of tilling practices, crop changes, and so on. I'm really happy to share with you kind of the more detailed report on this. But those are really the big ticket items. Yeah. And again, then if you do it for a concrete company, it very much depends on which regions are they active, right? Your actions in Switzerland look different from the actions you would do in Gambia versus in the actions you would do in Indonesia, and also the emission sources look different. Yeah.
And this is really fascinating. It really depends, right? Because beef, right? If you buy it in the US, a major part would kick into the deforestation part. If you buy it in Switzerland, it would be different, right? And that mix changes significantly. Yeah.
Happy to have a conversation after that. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm trying to get my head around the last slide again. And I think it goes in the same direction what you said.
The cost one? This one?
That one, yeah. If that's true, and I believe BCG, obviously it's true, this would be quite powerful. Why? Because if you talk to people like Beiersdorf, Henkel, Danone, Nestle, they all say the consumer wants to have sustainability, but they're not really willing to pay for it. Secondly, if you talk to OEMs, there's one example, they want to make their leasing fleets green, and only 7% of the customers would pay more for that, right? So, and this morning we heard that concrete, which is the second biggest element on Earth after water, which is used, is only basically net zero in 46. And yet you're saying it's only 1 to 4% impact. So I'm just trying to put this together and how this could be and why this is not put more emphasis on it so that people understand it. So that's one question. And the second one, if I may, is do you guys at BCG also have a view on internal carbon price? Because some NGOs like Öko Institute and others, they say it's 200 US dollars or euro, whatever you want to call it. But everybody knows 200, nobody really can pay for that. Do you guys have a view on what an internal carbon price should be for various industries? Thank you.
Yeah.
25. No, we'll get to that. Maybe can I quickly ask you? I will answer your first question with a statement in another direction. Right? I do a lot of work in pharma value chain, right? And it's undebatable that AI brings you 15% of efficiencies on your cost base. Undebatable. You can talk to every head of operations. It's undebatable. It's out there. People have done it. Yet, 3 pharma out of 15 have really done it. Okay, so here it's even more drastic. You're saving even more. And the truth is this is an end-to-end transformation journey. It's hugely difficult to do. For those of you who have been through an SAP transformation, can empathize with me, right? It takes a bit of time, it takes a bit of energy, even though we all agree it's a good thing. And that is the reality we are facing, yeah? And, we're putting this out. It's exactly to trigger the dialogue and say, hey, this is something that is just next door, we can do it. But the fact is to activate is not so easy. And it takes time. Yeah? And so, we were just discussing this with another colleague outside, is to say, hey, for large corporations, it's relatively easy. You have a few, they have huge innovation power to think about, they have a huge ability to drive change. But look at Switzerland and go to every individual and teach him to insulate the house, which costs a lot, which is a lot of burden and all that stuff. And that makes this even more tricky, right? So it's a huge exercise we have to go through. The net case at the end, we are all confident will be very good. It will be positive and it will be good for us all. But it's not an easy one to crack. And what we're not showing here is basically, we did correlation analysis, empiric studies of people who focus more on sustainability versus not. It has a positive impact on TSR, total shareholder return. So yes, you're paying a bit more to price and all that, but the net is positive. Yeah. And that's the truth of it, but you're right, it's not so easy. Second question, I was trying 25, but maybe Jens, you want to?
Yeah, or 26. No. Firstly, I think important to recognize carbon pricing, internal, external, is one possible steering mechanism how to actually attack your emissions. It's one of many. And I think it very much depends on the culture and the type of processes of the company, if it works or not, right? And there are companies like Microsoft who actually collect money on the P&Ls of individual business unit to create a pot of funding to redistribute. Others are using shadow prices, hypothetical prices to make the right decisions. I've seen companies who start to take scenarios from the International Energy Agency and say, okay, if the world would go to 1.5 degree scenarios, what are the implied carbon prices? And use those carbon prices then, for example, to say, what's the carbon content of this steel, right? You talked about, the gentleman from USM Halle talked about metals, right? If I'm getting this from ArcelorMittal versus this from another company, yeah, let's say Tata Steel, and there's a different carbon content, I'll apply this carbon price in my procurement decision. That's an option, but it's not something, and we wouldn't be in the business of forecasting, so apologies, we won't give you a number. I think there was a question in the second row. I think the gentleman behind the lady in yellow. Any other? So probably one.
Thank you.
And two, and then three. Let's see where we get in the last 2 minutes.
I shall ask a very short question. You mentioned the scope 3. When early on in your presentation, you were saying how time was important, and getting to the answers of assessing a scope 3 is really important. And you said that AI, you had techniques with AI to assess that relatively quickly and reduce it to days. And then you mentioned that actually you used AI for shortening or optimizing the supply chain. Did I misunderstand you, or?
No. Yeah, exactly.
So how would you use AI to assess very rapidly a supply chain? You go to a new customer, and they have a scope 3 situation, and you'd like to assess their supply chain within days rather than the weeks or months or years that it takes.
Yeah. So what we are basically able to do is we are able to use AI to deconstruct your value chain down to the bill of material. Yeah. So every component. So say you employ glass. Yeah. And now in this AI machine, we have all the libraries and all the taxonomy of what causes how much CO2. Basically, that's automatically fed in. And there is an AI ontology that basically makes that connection between what is basically the emission of 1 kilogram of red glass versus blank glass. And in that, basically, it connects it to your value chain, and it allows you even to simulate. You could then say, okay, let's switch it all to red, let's switch it all to clear. What does that mean? Let's switch it all to plastics. And you can actually play seamlessly. So in other words, AI helps to mine a huge amount of data, and with Gen AI even more, because with Gen AI you can actually, with AI you needed to ask a specific question to get a structured answer. With Gen AI you can ask a specific question and get an unstructured answer. It's even better than that. Yeah? So you can ask Gen AI, hey, what is the switch in my glass from this to that? And it will basically spit you out the answer. So think of this as there is a huge amount of data, internal and external. AI is able to mine all of that, make sense out of it, connect it, and condense it to the active answer, one. Second, it will give you a user interface where you can literally plug and play. So this is like playing Lego, and you can go through that and use the best-in-class libraries, your bill of materials, and in real time basically simulate this all together, from the very detail all the way up to the top. And that's the beauty of this, in short. Yeah.
Super. Thank you.
Thank you for all the engaged discussion. I'm seeing our time is up. Very happy, of course. I think there were a couple of outstanding questions. Please do approach us after the session. I think after we've dropped our microphone. And thanks again. Pleasure being here and pleasure discussing with you.
Thank you.